Welcome to Lesson 4 in C# from start to finish. I am Tim Corey, and today we're going to look at building our user interface in the design phase for our tournament tracker. And this is the fun step because we actually get to see kind of a rough idea of what our application is going to look like, which really helps cement some ideas in our minds, and it also helps hone our overall idea for how the application should work. Now, normally in this process, this is where I get out my whiteboard or my legal pad and I start drawing. And I am not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but I still like to draw it out because that way I can scrap it, erase not going to work. Or you'll have the epiphany when you try something silly and go, wait, that's not silly, it's awesome. So definitely put it on paper. But for our purposes, since I am showing on video, I'm actually going to show you a completed form, and we're going to walk through my thought process and some of the things that I changed and tweaked until I got it somewhat right. And again, this is about an 85 to 95% certainty. This is not 100% done, even in the rough layout. All right, that's enough preamble. Let's actually jump right into Tournament Viewer. All right, here's a Tournament Viewer form that I created. Now again, it's ugly right now. That's okay. Let's walk through my ideas for this form. First, we have the tournament and that name in the less than, greater than signs. And so what that's going to be is that's going to say the name of this particular tournament. So this form is going to display all the information about one tournament. So it's going to first say, this is the women's basketball tournament, or whatever we've called our particular tournament. Again, at this part of the process, we don't care how the information got here. We don't care about what the back end's going to look like. We just want to look at user interface layouts. So pretend like the rest doesn't exist and you're just developing cool screens. So we have the tournament name. Next, we have this round drop down. And so here's my thought. I didn't know of a good way to lay out the tournament bracket and have this huge bracket on the screen. We can see all the games in a nice ordered layout. And really, even if I found a third-party control that did it, that's not going to teach you a whole lot because you're not going to use that bracket in your job or to create your own application unless you're also creating a tournament viewer. So instead, I thought, what if I showed a list box, that matchup list box, and in that list box, I had just the games in this particular round, in one round. And so that drop down for round allows me to choose which round I'm displaying. So in a 4-round tournament, it could be round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. So that drop down would change based upon the number of rounds. The list box would change based upon which round is selected in the drop down. And then my final piece I thought of was, what if we only showed the games that have not yet been played? Let's think for a minute about a tournament that has 16 games in the first round. That's a lot of games. But imagine we have 16 games in this list box. Well, if we only have 2 left to play, you're weeding through 14 played games to find the 2 that aren't played. So instead, we could check that box that says unplayed only. I'll probably have it default to be checked. But if that box is true, then we'll only show the games that have not yet been played. So as you play games, that list will get shorter and shorter until there's none left in the list. I also had a thought that I would change the round drop down based upon the current active round. So for example, it would default to whatever round we're currently in. If we're in round 3 right now, it wouldn't start off this form with round 1, it would start in round 3. How that's going to work, I don't know yet. I just wrote down my paper as, this is a cool idea, remember this for later. Because now I'm not doing code, I'm doing user interface design. Now on the right, we have sample team 1 and a score and a box. They have versus and sample team 2, the score and the box. So this section right here, what I'm doing, or what I'm thinking I'm going to do, is I'll have the name of team 1 and the name of team 2. And then we'll be able to put in scores for them if they're not already scored. So if they're already scored, that box to the right of score will have an actual value. But if they've not been scored yet, it will have nothing. Once they've scored, we'll put the information in those 2 boxes and hit the score button to the right. The idea here is that would complete the matchup. Now, looking at it, I'm not sure that's my final design. I might want to change what that score button says and how those 2 boxes are laid out, just because I'm not sure it's totally clear with the score box versus the score button and how those 2 interact. And I want that to be very clear to the user that's using this form. So this form is basically done. There's not anything more that I think needs to be displayed on the form. It simply has all the games, and then you can score a particular game, and it will show you which ones are yet to be played. Pretty simple. We can probably add some more fun stuff, like maybe buttons that tell us who won the tournament or things like that. But right now, I think that this form is done in its design phase. So let's move on to our next form. Now again, it doesn't matter which order you do this in, but in my thought process, if I have a tournament viewer form, I'll probably need a tournament creator form. So here's my create tournament form. It starts off with asking for the tournament name, and then an entry fee box. That box will allow us to, if we want to, specify how much each team needs to pay to enter the tournament. And then it gets a little more complicated. So my thought is that we have a select team drop down. And what this will do is it will allow us to select an already existing team. Maybe one team enters more than one tournament, especially if that team is one person. So if we've already created a team, we don't need to recreate them. We just need to add them to our tournament. And when you hit the add team button, it's going to take whoever's in the drop down and add them to the list box on the right at the upper top where it says team/players. And that'll be who is in the tournament. Now, if we don't already have a team and we need to create one, that's that create new link. And while I don't get into visuals too much at this point, that's why they're ugly gray forms, I did like the idea of having that create new be somewhat different than the other buttons, just so it's pretty obvious that we're creating a new team versus creating a new team on this tournament, as in using an existing team, but adding them to the tournament. So it was just confusing. I decided that link button needed to be a bit different. Okay, so we've got the drop down for teams. We've also got the create new button for the team. Both of those will add whatever team we either create or select to the list box on the right. And now we have prizes, because a tournament has a name, an entry fee, players, and prizes. And if you're confused as to what a tournament has, you can go back and look at your data model, because the data model for a tournament tells you all the things you're going to need to capture. So for prizes, I didn't expect we'd have prizes roll over from one tournament to the next. They just seemed too different to me, especially the variable number of players in a tournament. So instead, I said we'll create a new prize list every time from new prizes. So instead of the drop down, we just have the create prize button. And that will pop up a new form, just like the create new team will pop up a new form. So again, in your notes, you should note that we have two more forms to create now, the create new team and the create new prize. Once the prize is created, it'll get added to the prizes list box. That seems pretty straightforward. Now, next to the list boxes, and I'll change these icons probably. I'll probably go with some kind of red X or something like that. But the delete selected. Whenever you have a list box where you're adding something to it, you need to have some way to get them out to. For example, maybe you add a player or a team and you didn't want to. You want to take them back off. You've got to have a way to do that without closing the form and restarting. And that's really all I have for this form. I just have that create tournament button, which will take all the information and create a tournament object. The assumption is this will also get saved in a database or a text file in some way. But again, we don't care about code at this point. Now, if you're looking at your model, you may have noticed that I'm missing one piece of data, and that is the rounds. We have a list of matchup, and this form doesn't cover rounds in any way. And the reason why is because rounds are random. Who goes in what order for each matchup is random. The number of rounds is determined based upon the number of teams. So all of that gets set up in code, and it's not something that the end user does at all. Therefore, it's not displayed on this form. Okay, according to my notes, the next form I had to create was the add team or the create new team form. And so let's go ahead and create that. And this is my idea for the create team form. It has a team name, which if you notice, let's go back to the create tournament, the tournament name, it's laid out the same way. And that's an idea that is really important to think about, is the continuity between forms. The idea that the same thing works the same way on multiple forms, or the same layout works kind of the same way. That way, even if you do things a little differently, the fact that it's done a little differently throughout your entire application makes your form and your application more cohesive. So we have the team name, and that's just a straight text field. Then we have select team members. Now this again pulls from the database with a text file, and it says, I already have team members. Why don't you just go ahead and add one of these if that's who you want? So if the same office team plays all the time, so you have 10 people in the office, well, there's no reason to recreate who they are every single time. They're the same 10 people. Therefore, for the second tournament, we'll just select the team members from the list because we've already created them in the first tournament. So the select team member, we'll select who to add as a member of this team, or if they're not already in the team member list, we can add them right in line. Now it's important to note that this form now does two different things. It both creates teams and also creates members. And sometimes that's not the best way of doing things. Sometimes you want some separation there where you have a button that goes to a new form for add member. But for me, what I said was, this is such a little bit of data, just 4 fields, all text fields, and I have the space in the create team form. Let's go ahead and put that right in line with this form, because I know that at least for the first little bit, I'm going to be entering new members right away multiple times. And I don't want to go 3, 4, and 5 forms deep to create a tournament. Now don't forget, we're already in form number 2, because form number 1 was create tournament, and on there it had a create team button. So in this, that's this form right here. Now if we say add new member or create member is a new form, that's 3 layers deep. And it just gets confusing and it gets cumbersome. And so the more I can streamline that by putting things together, the better I feel about it from a user acceptance and a user comfort level with my application. Now that might not be something you're comfortable with, and that's fine. You can definitely have just the button here and open a new form. But for me, I like the compact, quicker design process of this create team form. So that's what we're going to do. So whether you add a member from the list or create a member, either way, they get added to the tournament players list box. Once all the team members have been added, and once the team has been named, we go ahead and create the team. And that's it. And that's the create team form. So the next form, according to my notes, is that create prize form. And that's really simple. So remember, we have back on our tournament form, we have that create prize button that's going to allow us to create one prize and add it to our list of prizes. So this represents one prize. So for example, place number 2, place name, second place, prize amount, $20, or prize percentage, 0.15 or 15%, in which we accept there is definitely up to us at build time. So it's pretty straightforward. It has 4 input boxes and that button to create the prize. There'll be a little more that goes on behind the scenes to say, don't allow both prize amount and prize percentage. But besides that, we don't have a whole lot to work with here as far as difficulty. And so that brings us to our last form. And this form I really wrestled with. So I'm going to show you the form first, and then let's talk about it. This is my tournament dashboard form. Now, I'm not totally in love with this, but I have come to the conclusion this is probably the easiest way to make this whole thing work. You see, when you create a Windows Forms application, and again, we're getting a little bit into code, and that's okay, but when you create a Windows Forms application, it wants to create one form and leave it open the entire time. You can open new forms, and you can close those new forms. But if you close the main form, the application is done. And so I was wrestling this idea of how do I do multiple tournaments, and how do I have this system where a form stays open the whole time that's logical. At first I thought about having this switching system where it said, if you have no tournaments currently running, open the create tournament form. But if you have an existing tournament, go to that tournament instead. And that kind of works, except for the fact that maybe you want to have 2 tournaments running. How do you create the second tournament? And if you do create the second tournament, how does the system know which tournament to open up? And if you have no tournaments yet and it opens the create tournament form, when you're done creating the tournament, it's going to close that form, which closes the application. And that doesn't work. So I said, I need some sort of central form that kind of coordinates or quarterbacks everything. And that's this stupid little form. Here's what it does. It allows you to see what tournaments are currently open. You select one and you hit load tournament, and it opens the tournament form, the tournament viewer. Or you can say create tournament, even if you currently have existing tournaments. When you create a tournament, it opens the create tournament form, which is pretty self-explanatory. But this form stays open all the time. That way, if you close out of the create tournament form, you still have this form, and that drop-down should be updated. If you have a tournament viewer form open, it will be on top of this dashboard. You won't see the dashboard. The only time you'll see this dashboard is if you have nothing else open. So again, I'm not in love with it, but I think it works. And so we may have to tweak how it looks a little bit because it really is stupid simple. So maybe do some kind of design around it to make it a little more inviting, more splash pagey or something like that. But the key here is this is what we need on the form, and this is the form we need to use to open the application on. And that is the conclusion of our user interface design. That's really all there is. You just kind of sketch out some forms and say, what do I need on each form and what forms do I need? That's really it. So now, coming up next, we're going to talk about logic planning and the idea behind how do we wire up our data in our front end. And it's going to be a high level planning. It's not going to get really deep in the weeds, but instead we'll talk through the ideas of how we're going to wire up all the buttons and the drop downs and everything else so we have a good plan for what to do once we have the user interface actually built and the models built.